To the book of Proverbs 27. From the book of Proverbs. Now, as normally, we're going to look at several verses of Scripture, and so as I try to pick a theme verse for us, this is the best verse I could think of that goes along with what our topic is today. And you'll see that the title of the message this morning is To Commit to Community. To commit to community. And let's read the verse, and then I want to start with a little experiment this morning. Proverbs chapter 27, verse 17, a very famous passage of Scripture. The Bible says, iron, I was going to say iron. Some of you probably would understand that better. Iron sharpeneth iron, so a man sharpeneth the countenance of his friend. Now think about that. Just as iron sharpens iron, and we understand the concept behind that, who you hang around can have an effect, and I will say can have an effect, does have an effect on your life. Now I want to start to try to prove that this morning with a little bit of an experiment, okay? And I want to kind of put you on the spot right away this morning. So Ryder, I want you to go to that next slide, if you will. All right, this is a little experiment, and as you see, the picture on the left there has one line, okay, and the picture on the right has 3 lines of different lengths. And so my question to you is the line on the left, is it the same length as line A, line B, or line C? Now, before you answer, I want you to just sit there and think about it for a minute and just look at it. All right? Now, somebody give me an answer. What do you think this is not a trick question, by the way, okay? Somebody tell me what you think the answer is. Who's going to be bold enough to risk being wrong? All right. C. All right? Does anybody think it's a different one? All right? No, you wouldn't admit it if you did, right? Everybody is on line with C, all right? Now, if you look at it, it looks pretty clear. The longer you look at it, it seems like it's pretty clear, like it's obviously C. But the reason I'm showing you this is because this is a test that was taken, this was an experiment, that was done in the 1950s by a man by the name of Solomon Asch. And Asch did this experiment. He asked this exact same question to a bunch of people in the 1950s. And did you know that 75% of the people that he asked in this experiment, the exact same one, this was not different, okay, exact same bar graphs, 75% of the people he asked this question to chose line A. Chose line A. Now I know you're thinking, okay, are my eyes jacked up, or are people from the 1950s, were they just a lot dimmer than we are today? What's exactly going on here? And by the way, to put you at ease very quickly, the right answer is C, okay? So some of you are probably having a panic attack right now. It is C, okay? I promise you, it is. So you say, how in the world did 3/4 of people in 1950 miss such an obvious answer? Well, I'll tell you how the experiment was conducted, and this may answer your question a little bit. The way this experiment was conducted was Mr. Asch, or Solomon, would go in a room, and he would have this participant go in a room with a bunch of strangers. And unbeknownst to to the people that were in this experiment, all the other participants that were in the room already were planted. They were actors, okay? Planted by Mr. Solomon Asch. And so imagine if you're walking in a room full of maybe 2, 4, 6, 8 different people in there. Every single one of them in that room are in on the bit other than you. You're the only one who has no clue what's going on. They're all there for a particular reason. They're there to give scripted answers to certain questions. And so they were shown this card, exactly like you see behind you on the screen. They were showed these 2 cards, and they were asked, just like I asked you, which of these lines on the right matches the line on the left. And the experiment would always begin the exact same. First of all, there would be some easy trials where everyone in the room would agree on the right answer. After a few rounds, the participants were shown some questions that were a little more difficult. I mean, not super hard, but not as easy as some of the initial questions, not as obvious. But then what would happen is, as the further went along, these actors in the room would intentionally give the wrong answers. And that's what they were instructed to do. That's what they were paid to do. And so in the course of this experiment, when they got to this question, the group would choose line A, even though we understand that line A and that line on the left are not the same lines. We understand that. But they would all choose line A. Well, you can imagine what happened. The person who was not a part of this ruse, the person who was not in on this experiment, would immediately become bewildered, right? I mean, you can imagine if you were in that room, what would be going through your mind. Their eyes would open wide. They'd begin to start nervously laughing to themselves. You know, you ever felt that way before? You're like, well, I'm pretty sure it's C, but everybody's saying A. Am I crazy? What's going on here? They would again look around the room. They would start to double check all the reaction of all the other participants. And then their agitation would begin to grow as one after another, every person in the room delivered the incorrect answer. So over and over again, it was A. And the next person would be A. And the next person would be A. And it would be coming to the person who wasn't in on it. And as each person says A, they're just sweating more and more. And they're like, what is the right answer? I mean, I'm pretty sure it's C, but everybody is saying A. And guess what happened? Eventually, when it got to the person who was not in on the experiment, after all the people in front of them said the letter A, guess which letter they said? A. They knew it was wrong. They knew in their heart of hearts that it was incorrect, and yet they still said A. Now, why would they do that? Well, here was what Dr. Ash was trying to discover. He discovered that as the number of actors increased, so did the conformity of the subject. Now, what do you mean by that? Well, if it was just one actor and one subject in the room, then really it didn't affect the answer that the guy who wasn't in on it gave. But then all they would do is they would just assume they were in a room with a dummy, right? Hey, you crazy, But the more people you put in that were in on it, the more likely they were to change their answers. As the group of actors went up to 3, to 4, all the way up to 8, the subject began to second guess himself more. And by the end of the experiment, that's how you end up with 75% or 3/4 of all the people tested ending up with the wrong answer to this obvious question. So what's the point of that, Brother Adrian? What's the point of this little thing that you're talking about? Well, what the experiment proves to us is that when we are unsure of what to do or how to act, we look to the group around us, either consciously or subconsciously, to guide our behavior. That's what Dr. Ash came up with. Is that when a large group of people, and you're unsure, you start to look around you and say, well, what is everybody else doing? Does that sound familiar? We call that peer pressure. We have a lot of words for that. Well, that's what happened. He proved it out in this experiment. And by the way, that's what we do all the time. And we do it without even not knowing it, right? If I go on vacation somewhere, if I'm going to choose a restaurant to eat at, I'm telling you right now, I'm going to look at one website in particular. It's going to be TripAdvisor. I look at TripAdvisor everywhere that I go because I want to find out what restaurant in the city I'm going to has the best reviews, which one is the most highly rated. Because 9 times out of 10, that restaurant's going to be a good one, right? If a great number of people have said this is a good restaurant, then it's probably a good restaurant. Now, have I been burned by that before? Of course I have. You don't ever know what kind of server you're going to get. Me and Brother Mike were talking even this morning about a restaurant we went to over in Vernon to eat breakfast one time. And I asked him, I said, was this restaurant still open? He said, yeah, people love it, and they're all the time open. But the one time me and him went there for breakfast, we never even ate breakfast because the lady forgot our order 3 different times and never put it in, and we ended up having to leave because we were going somewhere. And so, by the way, I've never been back. I'm not going to tell you who it is. I'm not going to run the business down. But go on TripAdvisor if you want to. But that's what we do, right? Because we understand there is evidence in numbers. That's kind of a smart strategy to do that. But we also know there can be a downside of that, can't it? When the majority of people get it wrong, as in this case right here, it can lead to negative consequences. And by the way, let me say this. I believe that is what has happened in our churches today. So what do you mean by that? Well, I believe the church at large, including many followers of Jesus Christ, as we talked about already, have taken our eyes off of Jesus. We've taken our eyes off of the prize, if you will. We're taking our sights off of the correct target for our lives. We say we want to be like Christ, and yet we're not taking dead aim at Him in our life. We're not striving to be like Him in every area of our lives. We may be aiming at good targets. By the way, we may be aiming at great targets. But we're not aiming at the target, who is Jesus. And I think that's the problem. And so what this illustration shows us, right, as your next slide there, is that most people would rather be wrong with the crowd than be right by themselves. You ever been in that boat before? I have, right? We've all felt that way at some time or another. I would rather be wrong with the crowd than right by myself. And that's what this series that we're in is all about. As we spent 5 or 6 weeks, several weeks ago, looking at the red letters of the Bible and the 5 targets that Jesus set for us of being with Him and forgiving others and accepting His forgiveness and giving and serving and going. And the most important one of those 5, no doubt about it, was being with Him. Because as we talked about, our going, our doing, everything we are comes from our being with Him. You're never going to be an effective witness for Christ if you're not spending time with God like you should. It's just fact. You're never going to be the kind of servant for Christ that you should be if you're not spending time with Him. You're never going to be able to offer forgiveness to others in your life or even accept His forgiveness if you're not right with Him. You're not going to be that cheerful giver, sacrificial giver, if you don't have the right relationship with Him. So being is by far the most important one of those 5. And now as we take a series looking at just some 5 habits that we can take to help us be with Him more, some habits that we hope will overtake our lives and give us some unintended consequences in other areas of our lives in a godly, good way, I think today is probably the most important one of it as well. Now let me recap very quickly for what we talked about last week. Last week as we opened this series looking at 5 habits that Jesus showed in His life, and there were others, of course, but 5 that we're going to pick out and say this is the cherry pick out. These are the ones that we want to strive to be like. But we talked about these habits. One preacher said it this way: small habits done consistently over time produce major results. Small things that we add into our lives, if we do them for long periods of time in our life, it will lead to some major results. For instance, like bamboo. All right, bamboo has always been fascinating to me. I love anytime we go to a place that has bamboo. I know if you have bamboo on your property, you probably hate it. Most people who have bamboo can't stand it because it grows like wildfire. But it's interesting because for the first 5 years of its life, bamboo doesn't grow a whole lot. It starts underneath the ground. It builds this very extensive root system underneath the ground that you don't get to see. But above ground, you don't see a whole lot. But after that time, when it finally establishes its root system and digs in like it needs to be, then it can grow up to 90 feet in the air within 6 weeks. It's amazing how fast bamboo, and some of you can attest to that, how fast bamboo can grow. You see, people only see the explosion, and they think that success happens overnight, don't they? Well, look at that bamboo, man. It just shot up overnight. But really the process, the success of it came from a long process filled with many small, consistent steps in the right direction. And that's what I believe these keystone habits of Jesus can be in our lives. Small things that we add to our lives. What was the definition of a keystone habit? That they're habits that we form that unintentionally carry over into other areas of our lives. They're things that we add into our lives, habits, good, godly habits that we make a priority in our lives that begin to have unintended consequences in other areas of our lives. And by the way, you understand if you add good things to your lives, the consequences are going to be good consequences, right? Just like if you add bad habits into your lives, they're going to lead to bad, no, not probably, they are going to lead to bad consequences. So how cool would it be, how great would it be if we could have the habits of Jesus in our lives and have them spill over into every other area of our lives, to our relationship with our children, to our relationship with our spouse, to our jobs, to every area of our lives. And that's what we're going to do for the next several weeks. We're going to look at these habits. Remember, our theme verse for this series is Matthew 11:29. Jesus says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest unto your souls." One pastor said it this way: if you want to have Christ-like character, then you develop the habits that Christ had. He goes on to say, all of us are simply a bundle of habits. We saw that last week, that 40% of what we do on any given day is just habits. They're not decisions we make, they're just habits that we do. Our goal is to help you replace some bad habits with good habits that will help you grow in Christ's likeness. And that is the goal. The goal is for you to take some bad habits that you may have and replace them with good, godly habits that Jesus showed in His life that will help us become more like Christ in our lives. And I believe the first keystone habit is this, is that we should commit to community. We must commit to community. If you remember just a little bit ago at the very beginning, we showed that experiment, and we talked about the power of influence and the power that community can have in our lives. And we're going to look at that a little bit further. You can read any of the 4 Gospels that you want to, and you're going to see, you don't have to read very long to see that one of the first things that Jesus does in His earthly ministry is do what? He chose disciples. He chose His disciples. He committed to a community of like-minded people. Now I understand that they all came from all walks of life, but he surrounded Himself with people that were all in. They dropped everything and they followed Him. As He started His ministry, He sought to go about the thing that He was meant to do in this world, to rescue all of us, to make us righteous before God. And one of the first things that Jesus did was surround Himself with a group of people. I don't think that's a coincidence. I don't think that's something we should just skip over. If you want to look at them later, you can find it in Matthew 4, Mark 1, Luke 6, and John 2. By the way, those are all, that's 4, 1, 6, and 2. That's pretty early on in every one of the Gospels that we see that Jesus chose to surround Himself with people. Now, let me say this. I would say if anybody could have success going about it alone, it would be Jesus, right? I mean, nobody would have batted an eye if Jesus would have never picked anybody to be around Him, and He would just say, okay, I've got this. I am the Son of God, by the way. I've got this. And if He went lone wolf, all about Himself, none of us would bat an eye and we'd say, well, you're right. He could, right? But that's not what He did. He didn't do that. Even when the community around Him could hold Him back, if you will, He committed to community. Why? Because the truth is, you are not meant to be alone. We are not meant to be alone. There is no Lone Ranger mentality in the Christian life. As one, even the Lone Ranger had, who was it? Tonto, is that who the Lone Ranger had? Even the Lone Ranger had a sidekick. There's no lone wolf mentality in the Christian life. There should not be. We are not meant to be alone. In Genesis chapter 2, one of the very first recorded revelations that God ever spoke to mankind, He said this, "And the Lord God said, it is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helpmeet for him." Now, I'm not talking about dating here. I'm not talking about marriage, okay? I'm thankful for my wife. I could not imagine life without my wife. But I don't believe necessarily that God calls everybody to be married. I believe there are people who God desires to be single or who are single, and God can use in a tremendous way that way. Okay, but I'm not talking about dating. But I believe the principle is the same. That by the way, whether you're single or married or dating, fill in the blank, it doesn't matter. You're not meant to be alone. I'm not saying go do a dating website. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about surround yourself with people that will help you in your journey with the Lord. You see, what's crazy is, in a world that we live in that has never been easier to connect, right? I mean, we've got cell phones and social media, and we've got so many options to be able to connect with people that more and more we struggle with disconnection, don't we? More and more we have all these avenues to connect to people, yet we seem more disconnected than ever. Just because you see somebody's picture on Facebook every day doesn't mean you have a relationship with that person like you should, right? You can know everything about that person's life because they post about it on social media, and you could have not said a word to that person in a decade. There was a study that was done by Cigna, and it was done before the global pandemic. Of course, we know the pandemic forced everybody to quarantine. Even before the pandemic, 61% of Americans say they experienced loneliness. 61% of America. You see, we are made to be in community. Jesus, the only one who could have gone solo on His own and been okay, decided to have a community of people around Him. And some of you today may be thinking, okay, brother, that's good. I need to do that. I need to go out. And you decide, I'm going to leave here this morning, and I'm going to go find some people to be around. I'm going to get out of my comfort zone, and I'm going to make myself available, and I'm going to find some friends that I can hang around, some people that can be my community. And that's a great thing. Don't get me wrong. But before you go out and start trying to make friends, and before you go out starting to try to find community to be around, I believe you need to understand that the type of community and the type of relationship that you get into are of the utmost importance. I'm not here this morning saying just go find somebody to hang around. That's not what I'm doing, okay? I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm here to tell you find some godly people to hang around. Find some godly influences in your life. I don't want you to commit to just any community. I want you to commit to a certain type of community because your community influences you. So does it not make sense to make sure that we hang around the right type of people? King Solomon said in Proverbs 13:20, "He that walketh with wise men shall be wise, but a companion of fools shall be destroyed." You see, habits that we have start with triggers or cues. And I want to kind of urge you, I want you to see that the people that you associate with can be some of the most powerful triggers that you have in your life. You surround yourself with the right type of people, it can make reading your Bible, spending time with God, being in church that much easier, right? If the people you hang around are the kind of people that you talk to on Sunday afternoon, they say, "How was church this morning?" And you don't want to have to lie to them and say, "Well, I didn't go this morning." Hey, that's called accountability. But you also have the kind of friends who can call you up on a Sunday morning when you're getting ready for church saying, "Hey, fish are biting. Let's get out there," right? And those people aren't the kind, I'm not saying, listen, by the way, I'm not saying those people are not Christians, because there's a lot of Christians, that we're not going there, okay? What I'm saying is you need to surround yourself with the type of people who help urge you into these habits that we're talking about. Help you and support you in that. Let me give you a couple of surveys. I'm not trying to bore you here, but I think this is important. Schwab, in 2019, did a modern wealth survey. And they came out with the conclusion that 3 in 5 Americans, that's over half, 3 in 5 Americans pay more attention to how their friends spend their money compared to how they save their own money. Now think about that. 3 out of every 5 people, or 6 out of 10, 60% of people pay more attention to how the people down the street and the people on social media spend their money than we are concerned with how we save or spend our own money. Now, some of you can probably attest to that. I'm probably not the only one who's looked on social media and seen some of my friends go on these elaborate vacations. I'm thinking, where in the world do they get this money from? Where are they going? Is this one of those timeshare things they get to go for free? I mean, they're staying at this ritzy place, and they're staying for like 2 weeks, and how are they affording this? What's different? What's their situation different than mine? You see, financial decisions are influenced by these showy social media feeds, and there's this burden to keep up with the Joneses. That's always been a part of our culture, but even more so. Last night, Lincoln had a bad headache, and I think she's the one in our family who has migraines from time to time, and she gets to the point where she gets in tears over her headache. And so it's about an hour before bed. I was like, "Honey, just go lay down. Nobody's in your room. Your sister's going crazy out here. Just go lay down. You can just get some rest." And you understand, if you've ever had a migraine, you just want to get in a room with no sound. And she's got a little eye mask, a little bunny eye mask she wears at night. And she wanted to put that bunny eye mask on. I said, just go lay down, honey. So she'd go lay down, and she'd come back in 2 minutes crying. And the reason she'd be crying is not because it wasn't quiet or dark. It's because nobody else was in there with her. If you ever heard the term that's been popularized more recently is FOMO. What does FOMO mean? Fear of missing out. That's what she has. She thinks something's going to happen while she's in bed by herself trying to get her, even though she's in tears because her head's hurting so bad, she's afraid that something's going to happen outside that room that she's going to miss out on. And so this idea of keeping up with the Joneses, or this FOMO that we have in our society today, is very, very real, and it gives us an increased pressure to spend money. And so it shows us that our extended community, our social media, our Facebook friends, our Instagram friends, our Twitter followers, they impact how we spend our money. How crazy is that? Let me give you another one. By the way, the closer you are to someone the closer you are to someone, the more likely you are to have the same habits as them. For instance, there was another study that was done that tracked 12,000 people. That's a lot of people for a study. Over a 32-year period, over 3 decades, they followed these people. And they found out all sorts of crazy, interesting things, but 2 of the points were interesting for us today. Here what they are. Number 1, if you have one friend who is significantly overweight, there's a 57% chance that you're more likely that you'll be overweight as well. Think about that. It's crazy, isn't it? You have somebody that might be a little bigger, you're more prone to be a little bigger. So it's not the bacon cheeseburgers that you're eating, right? It's not that, okay? It's the people you hang around, right? Because that's why, the reason I don't have abs is because some of my closest friends are big boned, right? That's the excuse I'm using. It's true. So the people you hang around can have an effect. And by the way, it went on to say the good news is if you have one friend that loses a significant amount of weight, that one of the three closest friends to that person will also lose a significant amount of weight. Matters who you hang around, right? It matters in your life. Even the body shape, it can matter in your life. Another study that was done said that over a 30-year period, and they discovered, this is your next slide, that 95%, 95 is a big number, 95% of our success or failure in life is determined by the people we habitually associate with. Now, these are not Christian studies, by the way. These are secular, worldly studies that were done, that almost 100% of our success or failure in life is determined by who we hang around, who we are in community with. And so the reason that we're spending some time on this morning is because, well, number one, I believe, just as we thought that we said that being with Christ is the most important of the targets that we were shooting at, I believe this one's the most important. Number one, because we saw that Jesus picked the disciples very early in his ministry. But number two, there may be no more important predictor of the future you than to look at the community of current you. I want you to think about that statement. There may be no better predictor of who you're going to be in the future than to look at who you're hanging around right now. That can be a very encouraging thought for some of us, and for some of us it should be a very scary thought to think about. It makes a difference. And so if we're going to instill any of the other four habits that we're going to talk about in the next few weeks, don't you think it just makes sense that if we're talking about scripture reading and prayer and solitude and church attendance, all those things, if we're going to talk about those four things, don't you think that who you hang around matters? Because who you hang around can determine whether those other four things are going to be a success or a failure, can't they? You hang around the right type of people, those other four things may come easy to you. You hang around the right type of people, those four things can be so hard you may never accomplish them in your life. So we need to identify who are the people who we are allowing into our lives to influence us. Who are those people? And who better to learn from than Jesus and his community? When you look at the life of Jesus, we find that he committed to several groups of people. We often think of the 12 disciples, obviously. But did you know that Jesus had different groups as well? 1 Corinthians 15 talks about that he met with 500 people after his resurrection. Luke chapter 10 tells us that there was a group of around 70 or 72 people that were there. Of course, we know of the 12. But think about a group even closer than that. A group that we call Jesus' inner circle. Who was in Jesus' inner circle? Somebody tell me those three. Peter, James, and John. Those three men, out of everybody on this earth, had the most access to the life of Jesus. They got to see some things and experience some things that nobody else got to experience. They were in the room when he raised Jairus' daughter from death in Matthew 5. They got to see the transfiguration there in Matthew chapter 17. They were asked to accompany him to pray shortly before his death in Matthew 26. So the number of people he hung around got smaller and smaller, but as it got smaller, the more access they got to Jesus. So then you start to think, well, maybe we should put the types of people in our lives, our inner circle, the same type of people that Jesus put in his inner circle. But do you know who Peter, James, and John were? Now listen, these are great heroes of the faith, don't get me wrong. But they were average people just like you and I. They all had some very positive characteristics, but they weren't really the smartest tools in the shed, if you will. Think about Peter. What happened in Acts chapter 4? Peter and John are described as unschooled, ordinary men. All three of them were pretty hot-tempered, weren't they? Think about Peter, cut the guy's ear off, and Jesus picks up the guy's ear, and you can almost see Jesus' face. It's like, come on, Pete, come on, guy, don't do this. And puts his ear back on, and, hot temper, stuck his foot in his mouth quite often. How about James and John? You know what their nickname was? A better nickname for them? The sons of thunder. Now, why were they called the sons of thunder? Well, there's a story in Luke chapter 9 where they went into a Samaritan village and the village didn't welcome Jesus and didn't welcome the disciples. And James and John didn't like it so much. They said, "Hey, Jesus, you want us to call down fire from heaven and destroy all these people?" Now, let me ask you a question. Do those sound like the type of people that you would just say, "Hey, those people I want to hang around"? Now, some of you say that I do hang around those type of people. Okay, that's neither here nor there. But these weren't perfect individuals. Talk about the tempers with these people. And there's other things as well, but you know what this shows me? It shows me that this is Jesus' community. And you would think the people that he offered the most access to would be almost perfect Christians, don't you? You would think there would be nothing wrong with them at all. That they would be the sweetest, most loving people, and they never lost their temper. They never did anything bad. They just were not. We know they're not perfect, but man, if you could, the closest thing to Jesus, you would think these three would be it. But they weren't. And what it shows me is that community isn't always neat and tidy. Sometimes it's very imperfect, isn't it? Sometimes the people we hang around, it can be tough and it can be awkward. Sometimes the community we surround ourselves with won't always get it right, will they? But the people that Jesus hung around, the 12, the 72, the 500, the 3, they all had something in common. What did they have in common? They were on the same mission. They followed Jesus. Were they perfect? No. Did they have it all put together? Many times, no. But they had the same goal. They were shooting at the same thing. They were following after Jesus. They were on the same mission. Listen to me, your community that you hang around won't always be easy. There's going to be times that you absolutely get in fist fights with them sometimes, probably, because that's human beings. We're people, right? People lose their temper. People say dumb things. These things happen. There's conflicts that happen. But the question I have for you simply is this. Is the community you hang around, is your community, is the people you are following, are the people that you are allowing into your lives, are they following Jesus? I want you to think about that question. Are they? Are the people that you most closely associate with, are they followers of Jesus? Now, if you're saying, Brother Adrian, are you saying that every person I ever spend time with needs to be a Christian? By no means, no. Of course not. I'm a firm believer that our command, our goal in this life is to make disciples. And I don't know about you, it's pretty hard to make disciples of people who are already disciples of Christ. Right? I believe we're very much so need to always be having relationships with people who don't know Christ for the sole purpose of bringing them into a relationship with Christ. But the people that you associate with the most, the people that you hang around with the most, people that you call up when you're going through a tough time, those type of people need to be the people who are like you. I hope a follower of Jesus. So are they following Jesus? Are they pursuing Him? Because here's the bottom line. If your community is doing that, then most likely you are too. Think about it. If the community you hang around is following after Jesus, then most likely you are going to be following after Him too. And of course the opposite is that's true as well. If the community you hang around is not following after Him and want nothing to do with Him, I hate to burst your bubble, but they're going to rub off on you more than likely, and you're not going to be following after Him as much as you should, if at all. That's just the bottom line. Why? Because your community matters. And whether you know it or not, you are influenced by them. So the challenge for you this week is really from today's message, it really boils down to intentionally looking at the community around you and asking this simple question, is my community pointing me closer to Jesus? Is it? I know this is not a, 3-point outline, formal thing. I understand that. But think about this question with me. How important this question is. Is your community pointing you closer to Jesus? Now, you should be able to give a very quick answer to that. And really, we know the answer is only 2 answers, yes or no. And hopefully it's a quick yes. And if it's a quick no, we got issues. But even if it's a, well, that's a no, okay? If you got to think about it, it's a no, all right? Is the people you hang around, are they pointing you closer to Jesus? Because as you look at the 3 most influential people in your life, who are they? You've got Peter, James, and John for Jesus. Who are the 3 most influential people in your life? Think about it. The 3 people that you let most into your inner circle. The 3 people that you call out to when you're going through a tough time. Are they pointing you closer to Jesus? What about your 12 like Jesus had? What about, let's take it a little bit further, what about the 12 people that are closest to you? Are they pointing you closer to Jesus? What about the 72? What about the 500, if you will? I know the numbers don't match up perfectly with what Jesus was around, but you get the idea. Are the people you're around helping you grow in your relationship to God? Are they pushing you closer to Jesus or pulling you further away from Him? And again, if you have a hard time with that question, if you're struggling with loneliness, or maybe you're uncertain of some of the major influences of your life, something has to change. Well, where do you even start with